It's partially based on things that happened with my real dad, who after being married to my mom for 44 years did come out of the closet when he was 75 and started a whole new, crazily emotionally expansive time in his life and a real new relationship with me, and that was much more emotionally open, and we could talk about everything that we never talked about before. And then he passed away 5 years later, but even when he was sick, he was like quite alive and unfinished. And that's kind of where the title Beginners came from. So what you see in the movie is a character that's kind of based on me. It's not really all of me, who's trying to not just fall in love, but stay in love. And while that's happening, that love story is kicking him back constantly to the past and all these memories of his recently passed away father, and the father sort of teaching him how to be in love, maybe. And the new love is sort of making him appreciate his dad's attempt to be in love even more. It's like the unlocking the sex door sort of unlocked all the emotional doors, or all the chakras, or all the all of aspects of his intelligence. He became more curious, he became more alive, he became more flexible, his ego became a lot more flexible. So as his son, it was like dealing with a whole different mountain, I could say like, why the hell did your mom get married? I could never say that before. And he wanted to talk to me all the time about sex and boys and cute boys and all this stuff, and I'd be like, Pop, And so our relationship just changed utterly. Or he started to really get into my relationships and what was and wasn't working, and he got much more involved and engaged and wasn't putting up with me and my stories, and that was great. It was great to have his challenge. Doing this film, it's a long process. I started writing it in 2005, and it's gone through many different stages. The first stage, just me alone writing in grief, and that was very personal and very. Some things did become more clear, or some aspects of our relationship I got a hold of intellectually in a way that I never had before. So there was realizations and stuff like that. But that was just the beginning. And then you're still writing and for years writing and showing it to people and getting responses and turning it into a story that works for other people. Or this nugget that you want to communicate about my dad, about his new relationships, about his new openness. That nugget becomes more and more communicable, and in the process of doing that, in some ways it becomes less one-to-one with my real dad, And that was what I wanted to do. That was what I slowly discovered I wanted to do. I didn't want to make a documentary or memoir. I wanted to capture him and parts of him, but in a way that would speak to strangers in a dark room, So by the time I look at the film now, it's quite not personal. It's a project that I feel like me and my memory of my dad worked on together. And in some ways that really does mean I kind of feel my dad, like me and him having this weird conversation. And the conversation being the writing and directing of the film. And we're watching it, And Christopher's not my dad, I think my dad would have liked Christopher and would have liked Hal, but I never conflate the two, And it really is, for me, I think more than anybody else, it's a story. Because I know my dad, and I know how different they are. And that's one of the conversations with my dad and I had a lot, like, what do you ask for? What can you ask for in terms of love or a partner and all that? And he was coming from such a different world. And my mom, too, being half Jewish and a teenager in the 30s in America wasn't an all positive thing, and definitely put a dent into her sense of herself, and she would argue with this, I think, but that's me and my father's interpretation. I'm writing now, and I'm writing a story that's not as autobiographical, but I'm doing it the same way, where I just write any kind of idea or fragment or bit of conversation, or maybe it's a visual thing, or maybe it's a song. Just write it down on a 5x7 card, because it's really important to have it all flexible, and you can accordion it any way you want, and all the parts are movable. And I guess I really like working, because I went to art school, I'm a graphic designer, and I like working in this kind of collage way, with these bits and pieces that I've found. And then my writing really isn't in so much in like generating all the pieces as in organizing them, which is very much like the way a graphic designer might approach writing, which is me.
So it's kind of a modular kind of a
Yeah.
storytelling then.
Yeah, very modular and very needs to be very free, and I think maybe I have ADHD or some mental problem or something, but it's really hard for me to think in terms of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, but I can think of the separate letters quite easily. When I try to think of a whole story or a plot, it just doesn't turn my brain on, and I feel like I'm doing homework or math or something painful and bad. And then the fragments, this, you know, like in the case of beginners, the often memory fragments, if I just start playing with them, they have their own sort of organization, they have their own story within them. And then if you just kind of follow basic rules of dramaturgy, things start to kind of reveal themselves, like, oh, this part of the story is actually quite an emotional peak or an emotional breakthrough. So therefore it needs to happen here, you know. And this part, this fragment, this memory is not as emotionally intense. So it needs to be either a development to that one or the descending from that peak, you know. So things do find an order like that. And I like concrete, small, specific things that I can handle and that don't overwhelm me and that are containable and kind of humble. I mean, there's that cliche line, the personal is political, but I find that wildly fascinating. I find that like endlessly fascinating. I can make films about that forever. And I feel like trying to study our emotional lives and how they are part of our family story, part of our city story, part of our cultural story, part of our history, is the only way that we get like a little bit free of these roles that we've been put into: man, woman, husband, child, straight guy, whatever, poor, rich, all these things. It's our only hope for freedom, you know, or a little bit of freedom, which I think is the only thing we can really get to. And I also just find it kind of, I think history can be 1700s or it could be like 1978. I think history, it is our story that we're living now. The history isn't over, you know. History is still happening. It's how it's influencing how we're having this conversation. It's influencing the Melbourne International Film Festival. It's influencing audiences and filmmakers. So if we want to understand ourselves, I think you have to kind of understand the story which you are part of consciously or unconsciously, you know. And I think it makes for great films. I love that. Well, hopefully there's not one conversation. You know, hopefully people in Melbourne react a little bit differently than people in Berlin. Or different people in the audience. Like, you know, the film is quite dense, purposely so. Because I feel like 100 minutes is a heck of a long time. And I want to entertain. And I want to have lots of food on the table, you know. And if you don't like the turkey, there's some great carrots with garlic over there that you might like, you know what I mean? And I like films that do that. I like Fellini, I love Godard, I love, you know, early Truffaut. I love films that are like bountiful. And I like I said, I feel like I'm not making short films, I'm making 100 minutes. And if you're coming to my store, I'm going to stick a lot of stuff in the store. Because I like it, you know, it's not just salesmanship, it's like, that's the kind of party I want to throw, you know? So hopefully people are having different conversations, or people are relating to different parts, or there's, you know, someone's talking only about the love story between Ewan and Melanie, and some people are talking about the dog, and some people history. And that's kind of true. I've noticed that some people really gravitate to different parts, you know. They tend to say the same thing about the different parts, which is a trip. But there are, you know, for sure, it's not a minimalist story at all. Yeah.